Hi again, everyone. We are back with the red portion of the March of the Machine set review. Still, of course, in sorted by game and hand win rate on 17 lands. So we'll be looking at the best red cards on down to the not best red cards and talking about whether they're actually in that order or why things might be a little bit different, what best really means in this context. So, first up, we have Chandra, Hope's Beacon, 6-mana planeswalker with 5 loyalty, and the static ability whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then it can +2 loyalty to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, +1 loyalty to exile the top 5 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from among the exiled cards. And -X to deal X damage to each of up to 2 targets. So, first of all, full disclosure, I have never played with or against this card. Not even in Constructed. I gather that it is seeing Constructed play. I gather from these stats, in addition to the text box, that it's very strong, but I have not personally seen it in a game. The nice thing about this is that both plus loyalty abilities, the +2 and the +1, help you take advantage of the static ability. When you need more mana to play a spell, you can do that. When you don't have a spell to play, you can do the other one. There is a secret limit on the number of times you can use the +1 ability, in that exiling 5 cards is not something you can do very many times in Limited. However, having a 6-mana planeswalker in play that doubles your spells while finding you more spells to cast is also not generally the kind of thing that leads to games lasting appreciably long from that point. You should win pretty soon. So the secret limitation there isn't really that big of a deal. Also, 5 loyalty with a +2 ability is a very large amount of loyalty. This immediately goes up to 7. If you think about how difficult it is to kill 7 loyalty battles in this format, that could give you some idea of how difficult it can be to kill Chandra, Hope's Beacon. And then, obviously, if you have this, you can set up, a Volcanic Spite or something to play the turn that you played it. So yeah, this is a card that is very good at taking over games, and this 64.1% game in hand win rate, remember that's you need to grade that on a bit of a curve for the fact that it's red, and red doesn't win as much as some of the other colors. So in terms of raw power level of this card, it's probably a little higher than some of the comparable game and hand win rate type cards, meaning this one is a good one. Yeah, this is one of the best cards. So I assume that means you know what to do if you see it in your draft. Up next, Itali Primal Conqueror. Notable rare, not mythic, 7-mana, 7/7 trample. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among the non-land cards exiled in this way without paying their mana costs. And then for 9 mana and a Phyrexian green, you can transform it into a Blightsteel Colossus, an 11/11 trample indestructible that deals damage to poison counters. So I've never seen anyone need to bother transforming it, because the front side wins the game. So 7-mana, 7/7 trample is like a bad uncommon that exists in the distant past as a medium uncommon, and in this set it would certainly not be good. However, getting 2 3 spells is a very, very, very large upgrade. If this hits like normal cards, you're in very good shape on most boards, and the ceiling for this card is just absurd. If this hits like a great card from either player, the game is basically over. I've heard of spots where, a Tali into some kind of sweeper or whatever, especially if it's Fiora, where a Tali gets to live through it, just absolutely demolishes games. This is, obviously it's 7 mana. I don't even care all that much that it's red. You can find a way to get some red manas by turn 7. And this is one that I'm very likely to go out of my way to be able to cast. Up next, we have Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. This is a pretty famous monkey, so I'm just going to assume that you know what it does. Ragavan has the amusing 68.6% opening hand win rate, compared to its overall game and hand win rate of 59.6. So 68.6 opening hand win rate is pretty crazy. If you compare it to the set at large, it is the highest, followed over 1% below by Chrome Host Seed Shark, and like 3% higher than Sunfall. Opening hand win rate is not the most important stat to tell you how much a card will make you win overall. That's not why we're not using it. But it's, I think, the true, game and hand win rate, or the true metric is somewhere between game and hand win rate and opening hand win rate, in that the cards that you draw early typically have a larger impact on the game. Sometimes we'll joke about like drawing a card the turn that you win the game anyway, and the card's completely meaningless, but like you're helping out its stats because it happened to be drawn at the right time, even though it didn't do anything. And so like with opening hand win rate, that those are cards that like probably actually mattered in that game. Also, so it matters somewhat that Ragavan is so good in the opening hand. Overall, the card is, of course, extremely strong, but in limited, it is extremely likely that after the beginning of the game, your opponent will be able to block it, and you probably won't be able to like jump through realistic hoops to make it anything better than a 2/1 for 2, or for 1 rather. That's just not that impactful. So as much as Ragavan is a notably powerful card, it is not really like a top tier limited bomb. Obviously, it's the 3rd best red card. It's very, very good. But, if you're like looking at the rares you want to open in sealed and you don't care about owning a copy of Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, you would much rather have like a higher impact in limited card. Anyway, obviously still very good. Up next, Invasion of Tarkir. This is a 2 mana, 5 defense battle that when it enters the battlefield, you can reveal any number of dragon cards from your hand. You usually don't do that. When you do, Invasion of Tarkir deals X plus 2 damage to any target, where X is the number of cards revealed this way. So this deals 2 damage to any target a vast majority of the time. And then if you flip this thing, you get a really incredible creature. It's a 4/4 flying trample with whenever a dragon you control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target. You probably don't have any other dragons, but that's okay, because this thing still just is a 4/4 flying trampler that deals 2 damage to any target when it attacks. and that is a really good card in limited. So if you can flip this thing, you get a slightly bad removal spell followed by an incredible creature. And if you can't flip this thing, then you get a slightly bad removal spell. I mean, it's an appreciably bad removal spell. Like 2-mana sorcery for 2 damage is definitely like not a removal spell you would even usually play, but dealing 5 damage to a battle is not all that difficult. It certainly makes up for the slight weakness of the front side. This card, yeah, I mean, we're still at, this is the 4th best red card. So obviously still a great card that I think is often a card you would want to first pick, even though it's red and you should be biasing somewhat against red. But yeah, this card's very strong. Up next, Furnace Rains. So obviously there's something to say about this one, but 2 and a red sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature until end of turn, it gains haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, create a treasure token. So the thing to note about this card is that while it has a large number of games played, 33,000, is more than the cards around it, that's because it's an uncommon, and these other cards are rares and mythics. If you compare it to other uncommons, like Invasion of Mercadia, which has 58.4 thousand games in hand, you'll see that Furnace Rains is played somewhat less. This is because Furnace Rains is usually most often drafted by people who have ways to sacrifice creatures that they take, and certainly most often played by people who can do that. So what you're seeing here is very largely the stats for Furnace Rains in a deck that can make exceptional use of Furnace Rains. You won't always want to be that deck, and so you should not prioritize Furnace Rains as if you are guaranteed to be that deck before you are already in that deck. This card is definitely fantastic in like red-black with sack outlets, but this is not a generic, if you don't have a way to like really get value out of this, it is not what its stats suggest it is. So just something to be aware of. That said, this effect is fantastic, especially in those decks. And even when you don't have a way to sacrifice the creature, this is a very good way to transform a battle. So if your deck has a lot of battles, this is something you can look for, because your opponent stops having a blocker and you get some extra power. So watch for that. Just a moment. Okay, up next, Voldaren Thrillseeker. 2 and a red for a 1/1 with backup 2, meaning if you put the counters on it, it's actually a 3/3 for 3. And then it has 1, sacrifice this creature. It deals damage equal to its power to any target. So often you're going to back up something else to kind of get haste on your 2 power, and then you may or may not want to sacrifice the other creature to get a big like removal spell or player burn spell out of it, and then you also are left with a 1/1 that you can sacrifice, do 1 damage to any target. There is a lot of play to this card. It has a lot of options. One option is kind of a bit of a double strike type situation where you just take a big creature that's going to hit your opponent, make it 2/2 bigger, hit them for a lot, and then throw it at them to kill them. I would say that's probably the ideal use, in that when you pull that off, you win the game, and it's not all that difficult. But this can also just be a good amount of like stats for its cost, or just a on curve 3/3 for 3 with a reasonable ability that makes it like a good card instead of a bad card at just 3/3 for 3, like being able to throw itself. So this card just has so much flexibility that it kind of has to be good. This one, I think is a much, much, much stronger card than Furnace Rains, despite their identical game and hand win rates. Up next, Captain Lannery Storm. This is a reprint from the Multiverse Legends set. 2 in a red, 2/2 haste. When it attacks, make a treasure. When you sack a treasure, it gets a power until end of turn. This is a card that has impressed me sometimes in Arena Cubes. That said, Arena Cube is a very good... The cubes where it's good are exceptionally good formats for it. Like, your opponent's somewhat less likely to have a blocker, and you're very likely to have a lot of really powerful things you can ramp into, which those things are not really the case in normal limited. That said, this still often forces a trade while getting you up a treasure. It's solid but not amazing, as we see in its win rate. We're like, it wins a little bit more than Volcanic Spite. It's good, uncommon, unexciting, rare, top common type level, basically. Up next, Mihiri's Warcrafting. 2 in a red, 1 and 2 red, sorcery, 5 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle. Then look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the excess damage dealt. You may exile one of those cards, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. So we see a mix of play this turn or play this turn through next turn. This is this turn only, so if you use this like on curve on turn 3 to kill something, you're not going to get to take advantage of the exile ability. But if you play it on turn 4 or later, you're likely to be able to find a land or some cheap spell, depending on how much more mana you have. Kill a thing, draw a card is obviously great anytime you can pull that off. This is also like 5 damage for a red card. It lets you kill larger creatures that red often has trouble with. That said, this is double red, so it's not very easy to splash. It's a sorcery, which matters a lot for a removal spell. But it's good. Also, the fact that you can hit your own battle and then often have like a surplus damage, so you get to like draw a card and transform your battle, is pretty nice. This one has an identical game in hand win rate to Volcanic Spite, but I think it's appreciably better. You can see that somewhat in the improvement when drawn. These are both like red removal spells, but your improvement when drawn on Warcrafting is a full % higher. The reason that we're seeing that, of course, is like the Warcrafting being taken more highly, and then also some of the issues with people playing Warcrafting in decks where they're kind of stretching their mana for it, rather than decks where it's a more natural fit. Which one could hypothesize is why we see an appreciably lower game played win rate than Volcanic Spite. That could represent one of two things. Either people playing Warcrafting in decks with unstable mana bases where they're going out of their way to play it, or simply the fact that it's double red, meaning that you should be like base red to play it, whereas Volcanic Spite can reasonably be a splash. And so Spite winning more than Warcrafting could be an indicator that what's happening here is that the base red deck is doing worse than the potential splash red deck. So a little bit of some more information you can glean out of looking at some of the other stats there. So up next, Volcanic Spite. 1 in red, instant, deal 3 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. If you do, draw a card. So this is a card that has a decent chance, pretty good chance of trading up on mana. It's not hard to kill a 3, sometimes 4 drop for 2 mana here. And then you also get to increase your card quality somewhat. Every now and then you can do some tricky stuff with transforming a battle at instant speed to ambush an attacker or something. So pretty strong card. Obviously the top red common, and pretty well deserved, relatively uncontested. Next best common, very much meeting my expectations, is Ral's Reinforcements, which we'll get to soon. Up next, Fearless Scald. I believe so. We are, getting into win rates that are unimpressive for cards of other colors, while still among the best for red. It's an indictment of the color, of course, but it is what it is. So Fearless Scald, I think this is one that not everyone would intuit to have stats this high. I say as someone who is slightly surprised myself, and I've talked to other people who also didn't really think of this as being a premium red card. Part of the issue is that when you look at this, so this is 4 in red for a 3/2 backup 1 double strike. So when you just see 5 mana for a 3/2, it's not a great rate. And 5 mana red creatures in limited that aren't rare are usually not exactly where you want to be in red. Backup 1, of course, means that this functions more like a 4/3, and then double strike is obviously a very powerful keyword. So, if nothing else, you can think of this as kind of like an 8/3, but really a little bit better than that. So, if nothing else, this is mostly a better Yargle. Sorry, Yargle fans. Of course, really, you are often looking to use the backup on something else, so you get a really good attack out of some other creature at the turn that you play this, and then you still have a 3/2 double striker. This card plays extremely well with other backup, and especially with equipment. Putting most any equipment on this, especially the Greatsword, is very strong if your opponent doesn't have a removal spell for the creature. So yeah, this is a red 5-drop that's worth taking seriously, much more so than most red 5-drops. Up next, Invasion of Mercadia. This is a tormenting voice that also happens to be a battle with 4 defense that turns into a 3/3 Spell Shaper that you can spend 2 in red and discard a card to create 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens, and give creatures you control +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. If you transform this card early, it is very easy to win the game by just activating the Spell Shaper every turn. And the front side of this battle is like, a card all by itself. Like I think that this is a better card. Like, if you can't transform either of them ever, I think Invasion of Mercadia is a little bit better than Invasion of Tarkir, but not all that much better. And if you and so I mean, whatever. It's the front side is good enough to not be embarrassed playing. And then yeah, the back is just fantastic. So yeah, there's a question about whether this is the best red uncommon. Obviously, Fearless Scald and Furnace Rains have better stats. However, Fearless Scald is taken a little bit later, but also has a much higher improvement when drawn. I think that Invasion of Mercadia is good in more different decks, but the ceiling on Fearless Scald is higher. I think Fearless Scald is actually pretty exceptional in aggro decks, especially aggro decks that have equipment or something that make them use this particularly well. Really, like, particularly broken with the red-white hoplite that doubles your backup triggers, essentially. That said, I do think that if, somehow I saw them both in the same pack one, pick one, I personally would take Invasion of Mercadia over Fearless Scald due to its flexibility. Also, incidentally, somewhat appreciably higher opening hand win rate, which of course is just because 2-drops are better to have in your opening hand than 5-drops. Up next, Rampaging Raptor. This is another one that I'm going to express some skepticism about the ultimate statement of its quality as a function of its game and hand win rate, which is to say, I believe that this card is stronger than, for example, Fearless Scald. This is a 2 and 2 red for a 4/4 trample haste. You can spend 2 in a red to give it +2/+0 until end of turn, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls or battle that player protects. So this lets you flip your battles without needing to give up damage to your opponent. It's a large, hasty creature. Some questing beast vibes on this one. This is very strong. It only has a 56% game and hand win rate due to being highly picked, sometimes played in the wrong place. Very heavy red commitment. Again, I don't think that base red decks perform all that well, but the card itself is quite strong. And I guess really I'm most surprised, given all of that, to see Lannery Storm specifically with such a higher win rate. I don't really have a fantastic explanation about why, outside of just costing. I mean, obviously the advantage of Lannery is that it costs less mana and everything, but yeah, I don't know. I'm personally a Raptor believer. Up next, Rouse Reinforcements. 1 in red, sorcery, create 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens. This is the second highest game and hand win rate common, and I emphatically support the idea that this is the second best red card. This is, of course, a set with both Convoke and Sacrifice synergies in decks that red likes to participate in. Also, even red-white, which doesn't have a ton of Convoke and Sac. Well, I mean, red-white has a decent number of Convoke synergies. Doesn't have Sac synergies, really. But, also these are bodies that can use equipment or something. Yeah, this one's good. Up next, Stoke the Flames, reprint. 2 and 2 red, instant, Convoke. Stoke the Flames deals 4 damage to any target. Clean, strong card. This is often going to be tempo positive, and it's just a good removal spell. Also, it can hit players. Also, battles. Up next, Invasion of Karsus. 2 red battle. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to each creature and planeswalker, and it transforms into a 4/4 with ward, pay 2 life, and whenever you cast a spell, Refraction Elemental deals 2 damage to each opponent. Note, this is not cast an instant or sorcery, it's any spell. This thing does a lot of damage to your opponents. This is another one where the stats are kind of surprisingly low to me. I have certainly lost very, very badly in games that I was very far ahead to Invasion killing all of my creatures and then my opponent immediately attacking it with their large creature that lives through it and transforming it. Of course, it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes your opponent has the big creatures and you have the small creatures, but the ceiling on this card is fantastic. And I think it is pretty good despite its, kind of middling stats. Yeah. Up next, Marauding Dreadship, the 3rd best performing red common. 2 in a red for a 4/1 haste vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, incubate 2, and then it has crew 2. This is occasionally a lot of damage quickly, specifically anytime you can play a 2-power creature on turn 2 and then hit them with this. That was a good bit of extra damage you got. And then this card also confers object advantage, making a second object in addition to the vehicle. So yeah, a lot to like here, just in getting 2 decent objects for 3 mana. Chat suggests correctly that it's very good with Omen Hawker. You curve Omen Hawker into this, even if you don't have a 2-drop, you can immediately wake up the incubate token and use it to crew the vehicle and attack. Yeah. Not a lot more to say about Dreadship. Up next, Kenris Spell Spear. 1 in a red for a 2/2 trample prowess, and then you can transform it for 3 effects in blue. It becomes a 3/3 with trample, ward 2, and double prowess. This card every now and then kind of solos games. Some portion of the time, especially the player on the play, can play this, immediately flip it. Then the fact that it has ward 2 means that they don't really get punished for flipping it. And then if they have a nice chain of non-creature spells after that, it just pushes a ton of damage. Very hard to block when you don't know how many triggers it's going to end up getting. Card is pretty impressive, especially for its stats. But again, you really need to recontextualize all of these things in terms of red stats being pretty low. So if you're in red anyway, this card is pretty good in your deck. But again, you might want to note that the stats suggest maybe being red anyway is not where you want to be. Up next, Urabrask. This is a 4/4 first strike, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, deals 1 damage to target opponent, and you add a red. It has no additional text in limited. This is trivially better, I think, than a 4/4 first striker for 4. Yes, getting some mana and some damage is nice. I think it is hard to draft a deck where you get to trigger Urabrask a lot, and I think that it's easy to get kind of tricked into trying to go out of your way to take advantage of more of this text box that you should largely give up on. A 4/4 first strike for 4 is a fine but unimpressive body. You will usually play it in your red decks, but I do not think that you should go out of your way or see this as a reason to be red. Up next, Bloodfeather Phoenix. This is a 2/2 flying, can't block, decent aggressive creature, horrible defensive creature. And then it has the text, whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you may pay red. If you do, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end turn. Phoenixes typically come back from your graveyard, some more easily than others. This one is relatively difficult to return in that you need to use a card to damage your opponent or a battle, which is not what you're typically looking to do with your red instants and sorceries. So, I mean, I personally have never seen this card actually come back from a graveyard. I'm certain that it's happened, but I don't think it happens all that often. This card should largely just be evaluated as a 2/2 flying camp block, which is playable in aggressive red decks, but certainly not among the best commons or anything. Up next, Beamtown Beatstick. Red equipment, target creature equipped creature gets +1/+0 and menace. When it deals combat damage to a player or battle, create a treasure token, equip 2. So this card obviously is most comparable to Goldvein Pick from Kaldheim, which was also 3 total mana. Split 2 to play, 1 to equip, instead of 1 to play, 2 to equip, which meant that it was appreciably easier to move around, which is much better. However, that gave +1/+1 and not menace, and +1/+0 and menace is appreciably better when you have a damage the opponent trigger. So overall, I think this card is pretty comparable in power level to Goldvein Pick, but has the disadvantage that it requires red mana, which really limits the number of decks that can play it, especially since you need to have a lot of cheap creatures to really take advantage of it. And I think the format in general is a little bit less good for this than Kaldheim was. Like, I think Goldvein Pick itself would have a lower win rate in this set than it did in Kaldheim. That said, in the decks that can use Beatstick well, it's very good, especially in red-black, which has a lot of things that let you sacrifice treasures to do things. You're not necessarily going to have a way to use all of the mana that the treasures. It is often more valuable to sack a treasure for something else than it is to sack it for a mana. So this is a good source of extra objects that can be sacrificed for other things in black-red, in addition to potentially being, ramp and fixing and stuff like that. Up next, Hanger Scrounger. 3 mana, 2/1, backup 1. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. This is fine. It's kind of cute that it's when the creature becomes tapped rather than when it attacks, meaning that it can work both with crewing vehicles, as intended, notably by it being a pilot, but also by convoking. I don't want to play very many copies of this card because there are diminishing returns on rummaging, but I think the first one of these is okay pretty often. Better the more aggressive you are, or the more convoking and crewing you're doing. Up next, Lithomantic Barrage. Red, the spell can't be countered. Deal 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Deal 5 damage instead if that target is white and or blue. This, despite being red, has an appreciably higher game in hand win rate and improvement when drawn than the other color hoser, like the other cards in the cycle that we've seen in other colors. This suggests to me that this is a reasonable card to play in your main deck. I'm not sure that you always should, but if you're looking for another playable, or if you're looking for something to maybe catch you up, This is a card you could consider using. And anytime you're playing against someone with blue or white creatures, this is going to be a really fantastic card. Invasion of Ragavan. This is a 3-mana, 5 defense battle that deals 4 damage to another another battle or opponent, and 1 damage to up to 1 target creature. If your opponent actually has a 1 toughness creature or a creature that needs 1 more damage to finish it off, when you play this card, you feel fantastic. If it doesn't, you're a little disappointed. The backside of this, 5 defense, 4/4 prowess, and if a non-creature source you control would deal damage to a creature, battle, or opponent, it deals that much damage +2 instead. Very good with the invasion itself. If you somehow engineer a situation where you play Invasion of Ragavan and then with the damage trigger on the stack, transform it, you'll be pretty happy with the outcome, though I do think that that's very unlikely to happen. I think that how often you want to play this card is really just a question of how many battles you have, especially battles with 4 or less defense. I think this card is quite good if you have battles that it can flip by itself, and pretty unimpressive most of the time outside of that, unless somehow you're actually just like the kind of deck that's very, very aggressive and would want to spend 3 mana to deal 4 damage to your opponent, which, before you get too excited about that, I would suggest very few decks are actually in the market for that. Backing up a little bit, there's a question about Barrage. Is there ever a scenario where in best of 1 you don't start it main at the end of the draft, but move it to the main as you have more wins because blue decks are overrepresented in the decks with several wins? So I suppose you could. I'm not sure how often it's correct to modify that way, but I guess I could see it. Not something I'd really given a lot of thought to, but if you think it's borderline, I could see going that way. Up next, Shatter the Source. 6 mana, instant with Convoke, and choose 1. Shatter the Source deals 6 damage to target creature, planeswalker, or battle, and or destroy target artifact. This is probably the most likely way that you're going to manage to transform your Invasion of Ragavan in response to its own trigger. Though that is far from the primary use case for Shatter the Source, which is simply to kill a creature. I like this card in defensive blue-red Convoke decks in particular. I think it's okay in some of the wider red-black decks. I think it's pretty clunky in most red-white and red-green decks, so it can be okay to play in small numbers. I think it's very rare that you want a lot of these, though conceivable in some blue-red decks that are very, very good at convoking. Up next, Urbrask the Hidden. This is a 5 mana, 4/4. Creatures you control have haste. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. I am a little bit surprised that the stats on this are as bad as they are. This strikes me as a better fit for limited than the better performing Urbrask, but what do I know? I certainly don't have actual experience playing with this. And apparently I shouldn't be eager to fix that. I'm not really sure what else to say about this one. It's a 5 mana red card. Obviously, it's suffering from being taken very highly and, again, being played in decks that aren't necessarily like red based aggro decks, but these stats are a little bit surprisingly low to me. Up next, Shivan Branchburner, 7 mana, 4/4 flying haste convoke. I think that some very wide aggressive decks actively want this card, and most decks would prefer not to play it. Up next, City on Fire. 5 red enchantment with Convoke. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals triple that damage instead. Notably, slightly lower win rate than the Branch Burner, but I think slightly better card. I think I would often, in the decks that are good at playing these cards, prefer to have the City on Fire. That said, I think if your deck is a little bit less good at it, then Shivan Branchburner is a little bit better. So more decks tolerate Branchburner, but the decks that are actively happy about playing either, I think prefer City on Fire. This is not a card that I think that you should like take early and draft around or anything, but I do think that it's a good one to play if you have a very wide aggressive deck. Up next, Aki Scrap Chomper. This is a red 1/1 with 1 in red. Tap, sack an artifact or land, draw a card. Notably, this doesn't sacrifice creatures, but it does sacrifice treasures from Beatstick, and it is a 1 mana creature for convoking. I think that some red-black decks, particularly if they have Beatstick or other sources of artifacts, or like a somewhat low curve where you could see yourself actually wanting to sacrifice some lands, want to play this. Usually only 1 copy. I would be surprised if it was ever right to play like 3 of these, but in small numbers, they can give you like a better curve and kind of a nice like late game engine. The set in general is not short on mana sinks, and so having a mana sink that lets you sacrifice lands is a lower priority than it could be in some other sets, but this thing is still sometimes playable despite generally not being very good. Up next, Ren's Resolve. Sorcery for 1 in red, exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. Yeah, very low stats on this one. Not a card I've played a lot. I feel like you need to have a very low curve to want this. And even then, it's kind of a high risk card draw spell. Given that red decks are often looking to like get on the battlefield and like go wide with their cheap cards to set up expensive convoke stuff, and like if you draw this and you have convoke stuff in your deck, then the fact that you drew this means that it's less likely that you drew or played creatures, and so it's less likely that you have them for your convoke stuff, and then if you hit your convoke stuff off the resolve, you probably can't cast it. So this ends up getting kind of awkward. Up next, Furnace Gremlin. Sad to see it this low. Card red is pretty strong to me. 1 in red for a 2/1. Or sorry, a 1/2. Very, very different. For a 1/2. 1 in red, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and then when it dies, incubate X, where X is its power. This is the uncommon version of the rare Phyrexian that gives you an incubate thing when it dies. But base 1 power is quite a bit weaker than base 3 power in terms of value you're getting out of this incubator. And while its abilities play well together, this card clearly, what you want to do with this is get it into combat with a large creature, pump it up so it trades with that large creature, and then also you get a big incubator. In practice, it takes a lot of mana to do that, and your opponent can often just not block, and it's often not worth spending 2 mana to do 1 additional damage, so you only get 1 damage through, and it's also fairly difficult to leave up a lot of mana on your opponent's turn so that if they attack into this, you can make all that happen. They will simply not attack that turn, and then on the following turn, you'll probably have to spend your mana to do something, and then they will be able to attack. So it ends up being somewhat difficult to engineer the situations where you get a lot of value out of the Furnace Gremlin. It can still provide a little bit of value somewhat reliably. So if you are a red-black deck that can sacrifice things, being able to sacrifice the Furnace Gremlin and then get an incubator that's just has 1 counter on it, but you never even plan to spend the 2 mana to wake it up. You're just going to sacrifice the artifact. It can be decent there as 2 objects for 2 mana, but overall not great. Up next, Searing Barb, 3 mana sorcery, 2 damage to any target. If it's a creature, it can't block this turn. Incubate 1. Yeah. I mentioned that 2 mana for 2 damage at sorcery speed probably wouldn't be good enough. At 3 mana, it's a lot harder for it to be good enough. You get a 1/1 for your troubles, where your troubles involves spending 2 additional mana. But that's a lot of mana. I kind of wanted to try playing this card in a deck that was using the 1/1 incubator to sacrifice or something, but the front side of this card, or the base, the 2 damage part is just such a bad rate. 3 mana for 2 damage at sorcery speed that I've never really managed to justify. I think I maybe tried this once and it wasn't good. I don't expect it to be good. I don't think you should play this card. Up next, Mirren Bane Splitter. This is a red for a flash equipment that gives a creature +2/+0, and it snaps to a creature. It attaches itself to a creature when it enters the battlefield, and then it can move around for 3 mana. I've never played this one. I think that you could have a red-white deck that cared about equipment that could play it. Notably, the red-white deck that cares about equipment is most interested in doing that because of Rev, the uncommon that gives double strike to equipped creatures when they attack. This has a slightly awkward interaction with that card in that the creature has to be equipped when it attacks to get double strike, so you can't flash this in and then have your creature double strike. So you need to play it preemptively. This just, I don't know, seems a lot worse to me than the Battle Fan, for example. So I've never tried it. Up next, Furnace Host Charger, 5/5 Mountain Cycling 2 for 6 mana with haste. I like that it's only a single red. That makes me feel better about using it to fix a red splash. But this is, very much in the nothing special. Like the body itself is pretty bad, and I don't love the optionality offered by land cycling in this format, since 2 is a lot of mana. So I certainly prefer to avoid playing this one. I am somewhat surprised to see it below Searing Barb and Bane Splitter, but whatever. The card's not great. this is not the way that you should be trying to fix your mana in this format. Up next, Onake Javelineer, 5/4 reach, tap deal 2 damage to target player or battle for 5 mana. Yeah, it's just a 5 mana creature that doesn't do anything when it enters. Those aren't great in this format. Some games this ends up being kind of impactful, but not enough to justify its cost. Not embarrassing to play, but things certainly didn't go right if it's in your deck. Up next, Harried Artisan. 2 and a red for a 2/3 haste, and then for 3 and a white you can transform it into a 3/4 flying haste. I'm a little surprised that this card has lower stats than the cards above it. It's seemed like a playable aggro card to me. I've lost at least one game that I can think of to just not being able to answer the flying version of this. But here we are. I don't know. We're gonna see a lot of red cards that I think are kind of mildly playable, where the stats suggest that they just don't get there. That's, I don't know how it works for being the weakest color, I guess. Up next, Thrashing Frontliner. 2/2 trample for 2. When it attacks a battle, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, I mean, a 2/2 trample for 2 is basically just a 2/2 for 2. And it turns out you don't attack battles all that often. And when you do, 3/3 is an awkward size since most of the battles have like 4 defense. This is hypothetically playable if you have a lot of battles, but I've typically found myself not having room for it even when I kind of want to try it because the other 2s are just better. Red Cap Heel Slasher, 4 mana for a 2/3 backup 1 first strike. I could see playing this in a red-white deck with a lot of like backup or especially equipment with uncommons that have synergy with those things. But for the most part, this is just too much mana for an aggressive creature, and this really needs to be an aggressive creature. Next, Valduk, Keeper of the Flame. 3 mana for a 3/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, for each aura and equipment attached to Valduk, Keeper of the Flame, create a 3/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. There just aren't a lot of good auras and equipments in this set, and filling your deck with them to try to take advantage of this guy doesn't seem like it often results in your deck being in a great place. So this has the problem of being really bad unless your deck's really bad, which is a hard problem to solve. Up next, War Trained Slasher. 5 mana for a 4/3 menace. When it attacks a battle, double its power until end of turn. Again, just not meaningfully better than a 4/3 menace for 4, and 3 toughness on a 4-drop is rough in a set with Volcanic Spite, for example. Also, this kind of thing that really needs to attack to do anything doesn't line up well against Afara's Dispersal either. And that's a problem for a card like this. Up next, Poetic Prankster. Red 2/1. You can spend 3 mana to transform it as a sorcery into a 3/2 that makes each opponent sacrifice an artifact or creature when it dies. I'm, again, slightly surprised by this thing being worse than, for example, Thrashing Frontliner. I have increasingly found myself cutting it and playing other 2-drops instead. But I don't know. I feel like occasionally I manage to like be in an awkward spot against this or put someone in an awkward spot in it where they do get 2-for-1 by it, but there are a lot of ways to play around it. Bouncing it feels pretty good. So yeah, probably best not to aim to play this. Up next, Zadra Hedron Grinder. So this is a 3/3 for 4 with whenever an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedron Grinder, or whenever you cast one that targets only him, copy it for all your other creatures. There are some very good Mondo combos with this, with Sulfuran Shapecraft or Aerial Boost or what have you. The protection spell. I would note that this card has a 50% game in hand win rate, and that is probably already accounting for the fact that, like with Furnace Rains, people know somewhat to prioritize playing it in decks where it can do its thing. So rather than seeing this and saying, oh, I can fix them, you should be this is so yeah, rather than being like, oh, I can fix her, you should be like, oh, people have already tried, the ceiling is close to 50%, maybe don't bother so much. But that said, if you happen to have, say, 5 aerial boosts that you want to play anyway, and you don't have better fours, by all means, live your best life. Try to make the dream happen. Up next, Karsus Depth Guard. This is a 4/3 defender for 3, and as long as its power is 5 or greater, it can attack as though it didn't have defender. There are a lot of ways to make this card do something, backup or any equipment. Just a single extra power lets this thing battle, and then you have a 4/3 for 3, which is like kind of nice, but not super exceptional. I think the problem here, is that you have to do some amount of work, so some portion of the time, even in decks that are good at doing it, it's just not going to come together that you want to. And the decks that are good at enabling it are probably trying to be pretty aggressive, and so not being able to attack with this creature even a single time is going to be too much of a problem to justify the, gigantic advantage of having like one more power than a bad version of a creature that you would have played otherwise. And so that leaves this card in a pretty awkward spot where you probably shouldn't play it. Up next, coming in hot, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. Scry 1. This is a better Kindled Fury. It's also a reprint of a card whose name I am not remembering right now. There are formats where this kind of trick ends up playing well due to creature sizing. Like, if 1 mana is making you win most combats and you get to scry 1, that's pretty reasonable. In this format, I think it's pretty awkward due to the fact that you want to use this when you're attacking, and it's not hard to get blown out by any of Fire's Dispersal, Cut Short, or Aerial Boost when your opponent has not very much mana showing. And so that, just the number of cheap counter tricks make it really hard to be excited about coming in hot. Up next, Scrappy Bruiser, 4 mana 3/4 raccoon. That whenever it attacks up to 1 target attacking creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. Return that creature to its owner's hand at the end of combat. One might aspire to find some ways to combine this with enters the battlefield abilities, like, for example, backup, try to get more value out of them. But this whole package of make an attacker better at attacking and then pick it up and play it again is the spot where all of that makes sense to be doing is not very similar to the spot that comes up in a real game of Magic. Usually if you're in a spot where you're able to successfully attack, you kind of want your creatures to be in play doing that. And if you're in a spot where you're just kind of trying to like grind out value, you probably don't have attacks that you can make. And so this card just kind of fundamentally doesn't work. Up next, Trailblazing Historian. 2 mana, 1/3 haste. Tap another target creature, gains haste until end of turn. The worst in a long line of unexciting red 2-drops, according to the stats. Yeah, red's not really looking for a 1/3 haste, and going down a card to give your other guys haste has typically not worked out super well. There are a lot of red creatures that can tap to give something else haste. They're rarely very good. Up next, Into the Fire. A rare with amusingly low win rates. 2 in a red, sorcery, choose 1. 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker in battle, or put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. The allure of a sweeper that you can just cycle with any number of other cards that you don't want is pretty high. It makes sense that would be good, but a 2 damage sweeper in this format is just not where you want to be. This is if this were 3 damage to everything, of course, I think it would be a very, very good card. But at 2, it's just very rare that it actually does enough to justify itself. And 3 mana at sorcery speed is too much for the fix your hand mode. Up next, Invasion of Kaldheim. This is a battle that when it enters the battlefield, you exile all cards from your hand, then draw that many cards until the end of your next turn. You may play cards exiled this way. So the dream here is you have a bunch of cards, you set them aside, you draw a bunch of cards, you still cast all the cards that you exiled, and now you've like drawn cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. And then you also have this battle that you can flip into this enchantment. It's like a better seismic assault. You can discard a land to do 2 damage to any target, and whenever you discard a land, exile a top card of your library, you can play that card this turn. So now you get to cycle all of your lands while also doing damage. So the problem is you're spending 4 mana to not impact the board in any way, which makes it harder to flip your battle because you have spent 4 mana and not impacted the board in any way. And you've exiled all the cards in your hand, which is cool because you can exile the cards that you don't want and you can still use them for a turn, but it's unlikely that you have a lot of cards and the ability to play them. And you have to do some sculpting with this card because there are spots where you're just going to have a card in your hand that you don't want to cast next turn and you don't want to exile. And so it can be awkward to play this card on turn 4 or whenever the board dictates that it would be a good time to try to get your card advantage and get a battle to happen because you need your hand to cooperate. Theoretically, this is best in a deck with a low curve so that you can play multiple cards that you've exiled with it. But if you're curving out first, you're probably not drawing a lot of cards with this, and it means that you're likely to not be using the lands that you draw after that, but you're also not playing that many lands. This is a very awkward card. My best suggestion for it is play it in a deck with a low curve if you're going to try it, but more to the point, I don't really... It's not a card I've been inspired to try to find a way to actually play. Alright, up next, a card that I am an apologist for. Remorsen Greatsword, a 5 mana Convoke equipment. Equipped creature gets +3/+1 and has trample. Equip 2 with a 48.6 game and hand win rate and a negative 4.6% improvement when drawn. Stats indicate this card is a complete disaster and you shouldn't go anywhere near it. I have lost to it and had some good experiences with it. I believe that you need a deck that goes wide with creatures that have keywords. That's not very common, but it is technically possible. And when you have a lot of small creatures with good keywords to give extra stats to, I believe this card is actively good. But you really need to be sure that you're a good greatsword deck to put it in your deck, because the baseline stats are truly atrocious. Up next, Burning Sun's Fury. This is a convoke combat trick that I've never had the slightest interest in playing or really understood why you ever might want to. It is 2 mana to give up to 2 target creatures +2/+0 and haste until end of turn. Convoke to give extra power and haste is just super weird all around. +2/+0 is not really what you're looking to give a couple of your creatures. There's really like nothing to like about this. I'm almost surprised that it's been played as much as it has, despite the fact that it's been played very little for a common. And finally, Squee the Immortal. I will say that I really wasn't sure how to evaluate Squee the Immortal in this set. It's a 3 mana 2/1 that you can cast from your graveyard or exile. So it just kind of keeps on being a 3 mana 2/1. Turns out you don't really need to cast a 3 mana 2/1 very much, because as I've mentioned a lot, this set is pretty good at offering you mana sinks, and it looks like most of them are quite a bit better than casting Squee again. So yeah, maybe don't cast Squee any times instead of trying to cast Squee multiple times. And that's red. Yeah. So yeah, that's going to be it for the red review. I will be back. So this red review was recorded on Tuesday. I will not be recording green on Wednesday because I'll be recording the podcast. I will be recording green on Thursday. Yep, that's it for me for now. More cards will be reviewed in a few days. So bye for now.